Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
This Superman portrait is really a send-up of the original Fleischer cartoon intro, where you saw a quick explanation of the destruction of Krypton, the rocket ship coming to Earth, and the pose of Superman with fists on hips, where he's kind of looking down a little bit. This is an exaggeration of that, where I'm getting my traditional kind of Alex Ross low angle looking up the body kind of shot, which again I'll credit to Neil Adams as an influence. This is really just connecting with the most fundamental kind of influence in my life from that cartoon shaping the way that I illustrate Superman. It also connects in ways I'd never even thought about when I was doing the piece with one of the most famous images that Steve Rude did in World's Finest of Superman, where he kind of recreated that Fleischer moment with his painted figure of Superman, and then I would spend the rest of my career pretty much doing what he did before me.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Very happy to welcome, you see her now, her here now. It's Vivian Kleiman, who has made an incredible documentary that is currently running on PBS. And I've got a still of the title. Hang on one second, everybody, and I'll grab it. It's called Straight Lines: The History of Queer, or the Story of Queer Comics. And man, it has turned out just fantastic. It's a great documentary. Welcome, Vivian. Thank you so much for talking today.
Well, thank you for having me, John.
It's my pleasure. Well done. I think it, as I was telling you off the air, and I'm not being nice, this is going to be one of those movies that when people look at the history of comics, you told the story quite well. And I would never claim to know a lot of the beginnings of gay comics, but you certainly did fill in a lot of the blanks.
Thank you. It's really been quite a project, and I'm delighted to hear someone like you with your expertise recognize that there was a gap that the film will be filling. That's really awesome.
You know, I had the pleasure of seeing Mary Wings and Howard Cruz, a couple of the creators that you focus on, who were really responsible for a lot of the earlier efforts in gay comics, speak at I want to say either Printers Row, the Chicago Tribune Book Expo that happens yearly, or maybe it was San Diego or New York. I'm not sure. But it was really great to get even more information about them and others that were early creators, all the way up to modern day. I saw Sina Grace, who I've had the pleasure of talking to in the past.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, absolutely. And also some others that are current creators that I had yet to meet. We'll certainly talk about them. But I'm so glad, because we lost Howard Cruz just a couple of years ago. And I'm so glad that you got him and his partner and had the opportunity to speak to him at length. Because, again, they're a great guy, so respected in the comics community in general, and clearly in the gay comics community as kind of like a Will Eisner. Will was considered really one of the founding fathers, and thankfully, made it well into the 2000s. So a lot of modern creators had the opportunity to meet him and be inspired by him on a one-on-one basis, not alone through his work. But yeah, that's great. If you don't mind, I'd love to start with the fact that you did start with Howard. Well, really, before we get into that, shame on me. What made you interested in doing this as a subject?
Well, as I mentioned to you before we got started officially, my connection with comics was obviously as a kid, clutching either the nicey animal ones, or moving on to Superman and Batman and all that terrific stuff.
Did you like superhero comics? That's great. Well, tell me some titles that you read.
Oh, as a kid,
Yeah.
Fantastic Four and Superman and, all that delicious stuff up to a certain point. And then I got very busy in high school, preparing, for an academic track, as it were. This is not everybody's path, but it was mine. And I didn't get involved in comics again until I came out as a lesbian, and there was Alison Bechdel's Dykes to Watch Out For that was serialized in our local feminist newspaper here in the Bay Area. It was called Plexus. And
Okay.
Alice, I think, if I recall correctly, I don't recall, but I think Alison's series came out every other week. And we would just wait with bated breath to find out what happened to her characters. And it could range from a bad hair day, looking forward to the hot date that night, or at least hot sex, to packing as many people in a tiny little Volkswagen Bug and boogieing down from Boston or New York down to DC to demonstrate against something that was going on in the political arena that people were protesting about. And John, I can't tell you what it was like. I cannot describe the impact of seeing stories of our own lives represented in the comics. We were just commenting about the superheroes or the fuzzy animal comics, and those were really wonderful and exciting, and they fed into a kid's imagination, and adults who still held on to their imaginations. Um, but in Allison's work, and then the other work by other queer cartoonists, we saw ourselves, and we actually got to hear our own stories being actually represented, and the power of seeing yourself represented in the comics, both the visual and the verbal, is unbelievable for people who've been so traumatized by the whole process of coming out. So that's really my entree into comics. And then, just to conclude the little anecdote here, I wasn't involved in comics until Justin Hall, who is an expert in queer comics in particular, history of queer comics in particular, and himself a cartoonist, and teaches queer comics, or sorry, teaches comics at the California School for the, what's it called, California College for the Arts, CCA, here in the Bay Area.
Okay.
And Justin had edited the first anthology of queer comics, a very beautiful anthology of the work of some 70 artists, beautifully reproduced. And in fact, they're going to be reissuing that. It's going to be the 10th anniversary coming up, I think, next year.
Hey,
Um,
wonderful.
and yeah, so you can keep your eyes out for that. And Justin had a friend who said, "Hey, you should make this into a documentary." And Justin was introduced to a filmmaker named Greg Sirota. The two of them got started on this endeavor, and didn't seem to be able to get the traction needed to pull it off. Greg and I had worked together on a few projects. I had hired him to edit some of my work. And when Greg came knocking my door asking if I wanted to take over the project, I hesitated because of all the reasons I just described, that I wasn't, my connection with comics, was limited and not contemporary. And he said, "No, no, no, you're really going to like this story. It's a great story. It's a great way of telling queer history in the US through the comics." And Justin encouraged me to attend the world's first ingathering of queer comic book artists. I think it was 2015 in the
Wow,
summer. I
that
think
late.
it was June 2015, maybe 16. I think it was 15.
Okay.
And it was organized by Jen Camper, who's in the film,
Absolutely.
and with the help of Justin. There she is, the
Yep.
inimitable Jennifer Camper. And when I walked into that conference space in New York, it was held at the building at Hunter College.
Mm.
I was completely overwhelmed by what I saw. My again, I didn't have much connection with comics, as I've said 3 times now, but I did work on a project with some guys who had stacks of Zap and all kinds of Robert Crumb stuff all around, the office. So I was very familiar with Mr. Natural, and a lot of the imagery was quite familiar, and some of it not to my taste. Um, and my expectation was that it would be people who are more like Robert Crumb, who were more snarky and um, not so eager to meet new people. And instead, it was a room full of people who were so excited about being together. And in the middle of the room, when I walked in this first day, there was this guy with a balding head and a paunched stomach and a crumpled shirt. And he was completely engaged in conversation with a gender non-binary person, with covered in tats, chartreuse dyed hair, uh, many generations, like probably at least two generations younger than the dude standing there. They were completely like happy to be talking, and they were surrounded by other people, like the whole panoply, the whole arc of the kinds of folks that constitute what it means to be LGBTQ, were there and happy to be talking with one another. And over the next few days, I heard panels. I heard people talk at panels. I saw the artwork. It ranged from the political stuff, a la Alison Bechdel, to sci-fi, to bondage, to
Sure.
everything. The whole works. Everything was there, and I went, "Oh my goodness, this is a casting director's dream." There's all these amazing storytellers with wonderful stories. It's a different way of thinking about our history. It's a different way of telling our history,
Certainly.
and the artwork. My goodness, documentary filmmakers, we're usually scrounging for images to complement our stories.
Yeah.
And here it was just the opposite. Here was a case of a tsunami of images. And how do you how do you choose, one or two or three images to complement a story? And I knew at that point that this was going to be a project that was going to speak to a younger generation, and I wanted to be a part of bringing that story to them.
It's so interesting that all these cartoonists, whether they be gay, straight, whatever their orientation is, a lot of them, the new generation, sometimes doesn't know the history, and it's so great to see in your film the response of so many of the younger cartoonists. And wow, I had no idea how far back it went. That feeling, even of a lot of the people that you leaned on to tell the story, when they discovered they weren't the only ones and that were doing this, and it happens. It happens in underground comics, which was the home for gay comics in a lot of ways. I'm so glad, and as I assumed that Howard. I didn't know the direct connection between Howard Cruz and Dennis Kitchen, and Dennis has been on the show a couple times, and I've had the pleasure of having audiences with him, and he's such a great guy, and so important, and there's that, as you say, because Crumb is kind of the underground comic that everyone, I think, initially thinks of, but he really is just one voice in a sea of many. And actually, I just talked to Drew Friedman, the wonderful artist, and he just did a book about celebrating underground comics. I don't remember if Howard is in there or Mary is in there. I do know that Trina Robbins, who is spoken about a lot in your documentary, is represented. And but yeah, it's great that even back then, as far back as the 70s, there was a place for gay cartoonists to be able to go and tell their stories.
Well, I am so thrilled to hear that you've taken advantage of Dennis Kitchen and his generosity to come on your show more than once. That is so awesome. He is just like so pivotal and seminal for the history of comics,
It,
underground comics in particular. And the thing that struck me is it's a every time I think about this, I get ready to cry. What the key, well, Mary Wings launched the first comic by an out lesbian that was published and known about. I'm sure there were others that were not published and not known about. But then comes Dennis Kitchen, a self-described straight man, very, very successful in terms of anthologies on different kinds of uh, genre and themes and from the underground comic scene. And he wakes up one day and he decides that, hey, I've done all these comics about, potheads and, and this and that. And what's missing from when I look on my shelf, what's missing is the voice of the LGBTQ comics,
Indeed.
because there weren't any, because everybody was really frightened in the 70s. And in 1980, he reached out to Howard Cruz and he said, hey, I think you're queer. Not then. They didn't use the word queer then. I think you're gay. Yeah. How would you like to be the editor of the first anthology of gay comics? And thus began the whole story at that moment. And when you think about the fact that it took a straight man to be comfortable enough to say, hey, there's this piece missing from our representation of ourselves, of the world that we all inhabit. Let's do something to change that and fill in the gap. I just feel like that is such an important reminder that we are all in this together, and it's not just about queer people telling queer stories, although that's obviously, vital. But
Oh, absolutely.
we all help each other out in getting a leg up in the world, I guess is what I'm saying.
I understand, and that has been my experience going beyond a reader to discover the workings of comics beyond DC and Marvel and Image and some of the bigger publishers. That there really has been this strong independent underground movement, and yeah, I mean, no, Dennis gets it and gets it across the board, and also understands the needs for retaining rights to your comics. He was never a guy that God. There's Saul Vance, the guy who uh, the public like, oh man, what a great guy. He made the English Patient film.
You're talking about Saul Zaentz, you mean my former landlord here in Berkeley,
No
California?
way, no way. Wow.
I am seated right now in a building that used to be known as the Fantasy Film Building.
Okay, Fantasy Records,
And the
absolutely.
building got built because of the success of Creedence Clearwater Revival and all those gold records.
Oh, Vivian,
And then they built the two-story building. And then they made a seven-story building based on the success of the English Patient. And the poor people, not the poor people, the ridiculous group of men who created, the fantasy record label and the fantasy film company, they really did their best to screw the musicians, that they were recording. So Creedence Clearwater Revival is that famous incident that you're talking about. I'm
oh,
so
I'm so
tickled.
glad you know. I'm so glad you know, Vivian, and you told the story a lot better than I could have. Absolutely. John Fogerty of CCR, who made all that amazing music. Saul Vance kind of held on to the rights of that. And so many record producer labels and different companies, publishers would just be, hey, great, well, it's ours now. And, yeah, we paid you that, mythical $500 for your comic, and that's about all you're going to make. And we're going to make millions following.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally unethical. He was a nice guy to us, the
well,
tenants,
that's good to hear. All right, I'm glad to hear that.
but he was such a bastard, as
Well,
a producer.
yeah, I mean, again, that was just the way things were. And Dennis was one of those guys that's like, yeah, I'll keep the rights for 3 years, 5 years, and then after that, they go back to you. And if you want
Wow.
to go back to press, more power to you.
I didn't know that about Dennis. I'm going to send him a note. Wow.
Yeah, no, that's great. And again, um, just what came from Dennis's efforts, and then of course, these cartoonists did find homes at the Gay Advocate and other gay publications. Which is great. It is so interesting too, and you spell this out in the documentary that there's a boom and bust in the area of queer comics, much like straight comics had the same issue at the same time. I mean, there was this crescendo in the 90s where all of a sudden, after things were going great, where there was this huge bust period, even Marvel Comics was on the verge of bankruptcy. And I mean, so it again, it's a familiar story, taking nothing away from the personal stories that your documentary shows of these cartoonists. But I think also a straight audience will and certainly a straight comics audience will see that, hey, everybody kind of went through the same thing, and also that for the most part, the comic business, including the queer comic business, is a giving business, and everyone's there to help each other.
Right. Well, actually, it was enormously important to me to really go into detail and include the story about the boom and bust, because I wanted people to understand that here's this artist like Alison Bechdel, MacArthur Genius Award recipient. Her book, Fun Home, was on the New York Times bestseller list for almost a year. Somebody then gets the silly idea to convert it into a musical, and it goes on Broadway, and the performance wins more Tony Awards than any other prior musical has. Success, success, success. But there you see in the film Allison telling the story that, at the turn of the century, at near 2000, she was ready to throw in the towel because she wasn't able to support herself as an artist. And I just feel like, and then things change. Her luck changed because of the tap on the shoulder and some advice from a wise person, and she wisely listened to that person, or luckily, it's probably luck. Um, and her fortune changed completely. I think that is so vital, a message to give to artists today, young artists, that it isn't necessarily a linear progression, and that sometimes there are setbacks in the road, and there always will be hurdles to overcome. And here's examples of artists who face some of those, same hurdles, different ones also, and manage to, go on with their lives in different ways. And I think that's vital, a vital message for young artists today to understand.
And independent creators of all mediums. I so agree. And in fact, certainly during COVID, that was a recurring theme as I spoke to people that worked for DC and Marvel and mainstream comics, but also people that were doing independent comics. And it's like, how are you handling this? And I mean, it's just like any walk of life. COVID was debilitating for some creative people and paralyzing in some ways. Others were resourceful and like, well, I can't rely on publisher X to provide me with work. What other opportunities? And you made this film prior to COVID. And that's
Yes.
great because this is the general story of queer comics. Um, have you spoken to any of them and what their experiences have been during the COVID period? I don't know.
Well, John, if I were as talented an interviewer as you, I would have gone back and asked them that question. It's a very interesting question. I have been in touch with everyone over this time for various reasons. Not the least of which is to keep them posted on our progress and let them know about the national PBS broadcast, and plus the premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival, no less. But
Wow.
I haven't asked them specifically about the impact of COVID on them and their work. I suspect a certain number of them will say that they put it to good use, that they have an not what's the word, kind of like antisocial part of them that makes them happy to be sitting at their drawing table
Sure.
and creating art, as opposed to being distracted with day-to-day stuff and going to dinner and parties with friends.
Yeah.
I think most artists put the isolation, well, not most, a lot of artists that I know put the isolation of COVID to good use.
Vivian, I'm sorry. Did I hope I did mention at the beginning that No Straight Lines is now a PBS documentary that you can see on your local stations, and also you were telling me off the air that it is available to stream on the PBS websites that again you can enter for free. If people haven't used it before, I've done it for various PBS documentaries. WTTW here in Chicago is our local station, and it will allow you access to the programming and stuff. It's and it's interesting. You were telling me too. You were kind. You sent me the unedited version. That all the nudity is intact in the version that I got to see. You might see some blurring or some strategic spots where nipples and the like are.
Don't say that word. We had to do a lot more covering up of exposed body parts than I anticipated.
Yeah,
Um,
no kidding.
and
I
PBS is part of the it's a broadcaster as opposed
Sure,
to just on the internet
certainly.
like Netflix and HBO, and so they're beholden to FCC regulations. And PBS has their own set of regulations that exceed the FCC because they get funding from Congress,
Yeah,
and they get
yeah.
attacked right all the time by people who would prefer to have arts not funded.
I know.
Um,
I know.
so, but I try. Here's the deal. When I knew I when PBS approached me and asked to include the film in the Independent Lens series, I at first balked because I was aiming for Netflix and Hulu and HBO.
Sure.
Apparently, the film is too in your face for those people,
Really?
and when we got rejected by all of them, all the big streamers,
Wow.
PBS saw that and came back a second time and said, "Hey, we still are interested. We just you have to conform the images and the audio to FCC regulations." And I asked all the artists I asked the five main artists how they felt about it, and they all said, "We hate the idea of covering up any of making any changes to our work, but we love the idea of the story reaching 2 to 3 million viewers, which is kind of awesome when you think about it."
Absolutely.
So, with their blessings, I did go ahead, and I like to say I put on digital fig leaves over, over certain body parts and certain words, and I it was first shown Monday night on national public television. Not all stations show at the same time, and I watched it with a bunch of friends who hadn't seen the FCC OK version, and they all said, we missed a couple of words. We certainly understood what some of the covered words were probably, but nonetheless, we got it didn't impede in figuring out, the meaning of it all, and it worked. And actually, um, they like the idea that instead of making it discreet, kind of a gentle blur, black and white to fit into the black and white comics when they are black and white,
Yeah.
I actually went the opposite way. I decided to make it very blatant and make it known to the viewer this is an intentional altering of the artist's work. And I wanted to put it to good use to make a statement rather than to obscure the fact that we are changing the artist's work. But just the fact of zooming in on a section of an artist's work, that's me editing.
Sure.
That's an edit right there. That's me making a statement about their work of a certain kind. So it's a complicated deal doing a documentary film on the subject of graphic art.
Anyone who is a fan of comics appreciates when we see process and how the artists do it, and that's the another great thing about this. You see Howard at the draft board. You see all of them. Here's Allison at her draft board, and Howard in his studio. It is wonderful to see, and you literally do see them putting the pen to paper and inking. And was it Jen that was talking? I forget, or maybe it was Allison who talked about how they start doing pencils and then they erase and then they go back and they ink, and that's where the magic happens. And that again, that is a universal cartoonist comment and feeling, and you convey it so well and they convey it so well, and we literally see it happening. We see the art happening. That's fantastic. So I think it's worth those unfortunate agreements that you have to concede to, to tell the general story. And I again, I can only imagine, because I'm glad I saw the unedited version, but I do think it's an important story. And wait a minute, this blows my mind that Hulu, Netflix, I there's all right. There's a puerile website called Mr. Skin. I don't know if you're aware of it. They actually do cater to the gay audience as well, the queer audience as well. But that said, the amount of television and streaming television that is as graphic and blatant as it gets. I mean, well, look at HBO with shows like Euphoria
You've,
and some of the other shows, and yet these streamers are like, oh, I don't know, that's a little in your face. Really, that's fascinating. That is amazing.
well, yeah, only one of them said that to me directly. There's various polite ways of saying no.
Sure.
Um, but it's so curious, John, that you named Euphoria, because that's the example I'm always giving, that full frontal male nudity of a show that has won so many awards.
Yes.
But PBS is I'm grateful to PBS for, dare I say, having the balls, or in this case, having the ovaries, to take it on, because even with the digitized fig leaves, it's still an in-your-face piece,
Sure.
and in an age when just saying certain words has become taboo, the ban on a ban on the word gay, and the ban on trans people, and the ban on the censorship of books. One of the young artists in the film, Maya Kobabe, has a book, Gender Queer, a graphic memoir that is the most censored book in America today.
Yeah.
I mean, the most. And I promise you, there is nothing, nothing in there except an attempt for a person to describe their feelings.
And that's another thing that I think comes through in the documentary. You talk about, the creators talk about how parents are buying these books to help their children understand, as they understand their own sexuality, who they are. And again, this is really great stuff. And no, I do know that sad story. And also the tightrope that PBS has to walk to get public funding, and certainly government funding. We're sadly aware of the pressure that Congress and the like can put on. Why are we paying for the arts? And again, it is such a. Isn't that strange? I mean, one of the freest countries in the world, and the hypocrisy when it comes to the arts, and not supporting the arts, and not just queer voices, but just the arts in general. I remember the great Tony Randall, the great comedian, who was such an advocate for public support of the arts, and
Oh,
he would
wow, I
just.
didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and he created a theater company in New York that was privately funded, and now anytime he was raising money, he would point out again the sad fact that so many other enlightened countries, of course, they sponsored the arts, of course, they promoted funding for the arts. It is what it is. Thank God. Hey, God, you guys on your own, your Kickstarter campaign, raising the money for this very documentary, you raised over $41,000. Am I right to
You,
make the movie?
yes, and let me also footnote that it ranged from literally $1 to, I think the biggest donation was $3,000, and every single dollar was put to good use.
It's a great looking movie, truly, Vivian. You did a hell of a job. It's great. And also, you mentioned Tribeca. The documentary's won a few awards, hasn't it?
Yeah, I've been really quite touched by the reception to the film. I knew that the queer community would love the story. I knew that the comics community many people would be interested in the story. And I had zero expectation that the film would be embraced by the most prestigious of the film festivals, like Tribeca. So it shows that if you do something with the goal of having it have a long shelf life and not just superficial, but really I think it's because it's more than just a who did what encyclopedia. It's really my goal was to have it be more like a novel where you have different chapters and different stories and different events that unfold, and where that's more of an emotional ride than informational. ride. Information can be gotten, especially now, by the push of a button on the internet. Um, so my goal during the film was to take the audience into a world with an emotional connection that they otherwise wouldn't normally know anything about.
Well, and also much like yourself telling me that you were a tenant of Saul Vance, and you know that story so well. It was great to see. I had no idea that Howard Cruz was at Stonewall, the infamous incident in New York that prompted gay advocacy on a bigger scale and led to things like the gay pride parades that happen in every major city. I remember explaining to my younger cousins why is gay pride parade in June? Well, this thing happened in New York in the late '60s, and I didn't have the correct information. It was great to hear Howard's depiction and that Howard himself was there when
Yeah,
it
he was there high
happened.
on acid.
Well, well, he remembered
But
enough. So
he remembered enough. And in the film, when you see this older guy, he was the guy I was describing earlier in our conversation, the balding head and the paunch stomach. When audiences come to that section of the film, they see this guy talk about, this is the art that I created at the period when I was high on acid. Everybody howls with laughter.
well, again, I mean that's part of underground comics, as you say in the documentary. That's the place that you could buy underground comics was in head shops. So yeah, man. I mean, that's where you bought your bong. That's where you bought your one hitter, all your paraphernalia and everything. And
Right. But
there were
but
staff,
a
and,
yeah, but a younger generation doesn't think about older generation as smoking dope and doing, dropping acid and,
true,
that kind of stuff. You think of them as just old and other. Actually,
right?
that's one of the things, if I can just add a little footnote to something we talked about earlier. Because you were talking about how cool it was that the young generation of artists in the film were saying how little they knew about their history and how grateful they were for the folks who went before them.
Yes,
I just want to add how much that surprised me because when I grew up, when I was in my early 20s, um, the notion was that you don't trust older people and that they vote more conservatively, for example, and that their ideas are more limited. They're kind of, outdated, and we're hip and young and we're the future. And so I expected that kind of a tone of dismissiveness of the older artists and dismissiveness of, the past. And we are facing the future generation. And I was so touched to be wrong. I was so touched by how appreciative these artists were, and I just didn't expect that at all.
I understand. And man, again, I learned so much. I did not know who Rupert Kinnard was, and Jesus, the shame on me because a guy who grew up here in Chicago, where I'm broadcasting from, and to hear his story as one of the through lines of the documentary is really amazing. Um, Great story. I mean, that's the thing. All of these people have such wonderful stories that again contribute to the whole of the history of queer comics, but their own individual stories I think are relevant. And again, and I keep saying this, and I don't mean to say it to separate the subject of it being about the queer lifestyle and what they were able to accomplish, but it's a universal story in a lot of ways, and I think that's terrific.
Well, that's actually what captured my heart. When Howard was doing his presentation at that conference, I think it was the keynote, and he showed one comic that he had done, one strip, and it was about a young guy wrote coming to their family. One dark, snowy night, he went outside and put it in the mailbox and then immediately felt regret. Oh my God, what have I done? I wish I hadn't sent that letter. And could I reach in and take that letter out of the US mailbox? And I went, my goodness, don't we all haven't we all had that sense of regret and remorse at either having sent an email that we wish we hadn't, or said something to somebody that we wish we hadn't, or done something, that sense of regret and remorse. I just felt like, oh, that's what we all share. And if I can do a film that captures the feelings that we all share, um, or that many of us share, then that would be an awesome way to kind of like normalize what it is to be a queer person in the US.
I agree. Absolutely. I didn't know, and it's again, I still read DC and Marvel books. I didn't know that Ivan Velez, A, was gay. I wasn't aware of his
Mhm.
Marvel work. There he is wearing a Black Panther T-shirt, and you see a bit of it. Cena Grace is in the documentary as well, and Cena's a wonderful Marvel writer who's written. They've gone back and taken a couple characters. And rewritten them like Cena had Iceman, one of the X-Men, and X-Men, and Bobby Drake, Iceman, is now a gay character. They've done it in the Batman family. Tim Drake, one of the Robins, is now non-binary, and of course, Superman's son is bisexual, I believe. Yeah,
Bisexual.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Another,
created quite a scandal. It's even
yes,
reached the
indeed.
front page of the New York Times.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It
He
was quite the scandal. Oh yeah, Fox News made a meal of it. Unfortunately, yeah.
made a meal of it. That's a great line.
Sad but true.
Yeah,
No,
actually, I met Stina for the first time at that conference. He was one of the people standing in the circle around Howard. Only, funny thing enough, I thought when I looked at him before I met him, I saw him standing there. I thought, oh, he's like the GQ gentleman. And little did I know, how later on I was so soon to discover that, oh, he's much more complicated than that.
great guy. Another friend of mine that did make it in the documentary. I don't know if you're aware of him. Steve Orlando is his pen name, and he's done a lot of writing for both DC and Marvel. He's a bisexual gentleman, and very accomplished writer. And that's the thing. A lot of times, God, Joan Hilty. There's a brief picture of her in the bathtub with, I want to say, Allison. No, not Allison. Is
Yeah,
it
yes,
Janet?
Yes,
Oh,
Allison and Jen Camper,
okay,
and
it is
a
Allison and Janet.
video taken in 1990, I think. They were babies.
Well, and I've admired Joan's editing at DC and Vertigo Comics for years, and she edits or edited two of my favorite people in comics, Greg Rucka and his wife Jen Van Meter, and I just knew her again from her work, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know Joan is gay. I'm like, wait a minute, and apparently, yes, of course, Joan is gay, and shame on me, I haven't had her on Word Balloon yet, but I've got to have her on about her own comic book. I
Oh,
just never
that
had it.
would be so awesome
Oh
to
yeah.
get her on. I would love to hear what she says about her career.
No, I'm gonna have to. Greg and Jen are really good friends, and I've told them in the past make that connection for me, and now after seeing the movie, even more so.
I'd
Um,
be happy to introduce you to her.
oh, it would be. Oh my God, Vivian, that would be great. Because
Totally.
truly, and some of the others that you have here in the documentary, and again, I'm just so glad that you got Howard. I mean, literally, I don't know when you finished filming, but he died in 2019.
Yeah.
So I
Let me just stop you there if you don't mind and
please.
say that he passed away Sunday night in 2019, and the plan had been in the hospital. But the plan had been for him to leave the hospital that afternoon, go home, and on Monday at morning watch the film from the
Oh,
hospital that they brought into the house. And sadly, he never got to see. Well, it wouldn't have been the final film. He was going to watch a good rough cut of the film, and it breaks my heart that he never got to see it.
absolutely. I'm assuming his partner did get to see it.
Yes,
That's wonderful. That's great. No, you really, and again, it's the home life that you show of him and of Rupert as well.
it
Uh,
just shows that people are people. You got to eat
absolutely.
breakfast. You might want to eat breakfast in front of the TV, watching the news. You might not. You might have a dog looking out the window, or you might not. You might have a cat, going between your feet or looking out the window.
Howard and his partner watching TV and having their little TV trays out and stuff. It reminded me of Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner on that Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee that Jerry Seinfeld shot, and the two of them, and certainly even my elder relatives and stuff, how they camp out in front of the TV with their meals and stuff.
I will not tell Eddie, Howard's partner, that. That will be our secret.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, definitely. Is there a graphic novel as well of No Straight Lines?
No, what it is, it's an anthology of queer comic
Oh,
books. But
excuse me, but yeah, that's what I meant actually. Yeah, that there's a
yeah, it's an
collection of their stories.
anthology. But Justin is working on a personal graphic memoir. I think it's part memoir, part fiction, and I think it's due to come out in 2025.
Oh, great.
So he's busy meeting some deadline for an editor, and that going to be an awesome publication because his artwork has really, in these 5 6 years that we've been collaborating on the film, his artwork has just really soared.
Is this visual I'm showing now? Is that Justin's artwork there?
No, that's art that he commissioned for the cover of the book. It's Maurice Vellencoop, who's a brilliant Canadian artist. Uh,
Okay,
love that work.
that's great. Will there be a DVD of the documentary?
Yes, but it's so curious that you are asking that. Do you find that a lot of your audience is eager to have a DVD?
Yes, I am. I've spoken to other documentarians that have covered comics. A friend, Maria Carbonaro, made a wonderful, actually, an interesting story. Jeffrey Jones, who became Jeffrey Catherine Jones and transitioned to being a woman before she passed away. And it was she is a very interesting story. Better Things: The Life of Jeffrey Catherine Jones is the title of this documentary. It's out through Kino Lorber.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh,
No,
wow.
absolutely. Kino Lorber distributes it. And it's a great story because she referred to herself and her comics career, she would refer to herself as Jeffrey. And when she spoke of that part of her life, it was okay to refer to her as Jeffrey then. And she was a very significant fantasy artist of the 70s and was shared a studio in New York with luminaries that you may or may not know these names: Michael Kaluta and Barry Windsor Smith and oh god, Swamp Thing. Shame on me, I can't think of his name right now. Shame on me. One of the co-creators of Swamp Thing, and amazing fantasy work, beautiful stuff. And then and was married to Walt Simonson's wife, Louise Simonson, who was a very important comic book writer and artist, or and an editor. Then he was in a relationship with Gilbert Shelton, I believe, back in the day, who a gentleman who was also a bisexual gentleman. Very interesting life, and yeah, that's great. And also Will Eisner, there's a wonderful documentary about him. So yeah, I think yeah, that is on DVD, and I think no, I do think there is a buying audience for a DVD. I hope you guys make that choice.
Yeah, no, we actually did make it, but we didn't make a fancy cover for the DVD. And now listening to you, I will.
There you go. Are there commentaries on the DVD?
No, we
See,
did
I'm going to
not.
bug you to do that too.
No, but no, but that's actually an interesting idea. Thank you very much for this suggestion. Like the director's commentary.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I bet you guys, and also, man, all right. See, I'm already making you go back and make a special edition because I don't know if you include any raw interviews that beyond the completed documentary and stuff,
Right.
more material.
I was actually going to do that and put it on the website, but it's an idea to, if we do an expanded DVD, that we certainly would include some of that.
Or any podcasting or any elements of audio where you're just doing your interviews and stuff. I mean, any beyond the visuals, because again, the visuals are amazing.
Well, the audio, it's kind of interesting. You being an audio person. By the way, you have a great radio voice.
Thank you.
The audio for the film is part of what has made the film as rich as it is. As a filmmaker, I happen to know that it's the soundtrack that is the most important part of the film. Content, of course, but if the image is kind of funky and maybe the colors aren't so saturated, but the sound is pristine and well developed, that's what gets to an audience. That's what gets it gets directly to the person's heart. And let me point out that we did the sound mix up at the famous Lucasfilm Studios, and where they have this amazing archive of audio. So, for example, in Paige Braddock's panel of there's a dyke, Butch Dyke on a motorcycle and luring somebody else on for a ride, and you hear the sound of the motorcycle revving. Well, guess what? Paige's image, she wrote that it's a Ducati, I think 72 or 69. And the sound mixer goes, "Oh, wait a second." And he goes into this amazing vast library of Lucas sounds. And he found the actual sound of a Ducati motorcycle from that year that we used in the film.
Outstanding. There you go. I'm sure some motorcycle aficionado is going to be, man, they nailed it. Very good. That's wonderful to hear.
And by
Truly.
the way, speaking of Chicago, where Rupert Kennard is talking about growing up in Chicago, and we see
Yeah,
images of the elevated train, the L. We are actually hearing the actual sound of the L from that year.
that's excellent. Outstanding. No, and again, these individual stories will touch everyone's hearts when they see it as well, and the universality, but also again their separate stories and what it was like to be queer, the times they chose to come out, the difficulties and other personal hardships that they persevered through. And I won't tip it because we do want people to watch the documentary. But really, Vivian, well done. I
Thank you.
really think top to bottom, excellent film. It's on PBS now. It's part of Independent Lens.
Yes,
That's
if you go to the National PBS website, pbs.org, and click on Independent Lens, it's available for free for the next 3 months through April 23rd, I think. And after that, it's still available, but to PBS members. And hey, I think it's like $6 a month for PBS. So it's a nice thing to do. Support your PBS station.
indeed, no question, and your PBS or your public radio station as well.
Same.
You'll forgive me being the audio guy, but No Straight Lines, the story of queer comics, a wonderful documentary now showing through PBS and Independent Lens, and very happy to have this conversation today with Vivian Kleiman. Well done, Vivian. Truly excellent job. I really wish you luck with this. Any other projects that you're working on that we would like to telegraph? Uh,
Yes, thank you very much. I know not right now for in terms of a comics content, but after spending a lot of time pulling this one across the finish line, I'm going back and doing commissioned work. So a couple of folks are hiring me to do short projects, a family history, a portrait of the corporate blah blah, interesting stories, but paid work that's going to pay the bills.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, continued success.
Thank
And
you so much.
I certainly
Thank you.
hope that people will become more aware of your work through this wonderful documentary.
Thank you so very much, and really thank you so much for having me on the show and for your kind words. I can't tell you, it really helps replenish a very dry soul after
Oh, my,
after working in isolation. It's a joy and a delight. So thank you and thank you for all you're doing. Like you have an amazing program here. So
you're
it's
very
awesome.
kind. I hope I'm one of many that are taking the opportunity to talking to you about this fantastic project.
Great.
So, thanks everybody for watching. More Great Word Balloon coming your way very soon. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.